Welcome. Today we're going to look at how to lean into the strengths of LLMs. My name is Blair, and I'm a data scientist in Vancouver, British Columbia. I have a master's of applied science from the University of Victoria, Faculty of Civil Engineering, where I studied how to apply machine learning and LLMs to building design and building engineering. I have a background in architecture and engineering, and I'm really grateful for that experience because it really allows me to have a very multidisciplinary approach when I'm trying to extract maximum value from a very specific AI application. If you're lucky enough to see it, this is a midpoint slide from a presentation I was doing in the summer and fall of last year. And that last point, I always remarked to the audience the importance of leaning into the strengths of LLMs and how that single point, that single takeaway could really fill an entire presentation. And this is that presentation. So our plan of attack here is to look at the theory of LLMs, then the strengths of LLMs, then some applications of LLMs, and lastly, some tips about how to lean into the strengths of LLMs. One of the things I love about coding is that it really lays into the strengths of sort of deductive reasoning. And I sort of think of it as this cat sort of learning the laws of motion and creating this an elaborate mousetrap where if you turn the gear, it turns all these gears and pulleys and screws and sets the trap on the mouse. And deductive reasoning is a form of reasoning where the conclusion must be true if the premises are valid and true. So it moves from these sort of general rules to specific certain outcomes, and it sort of guarantees certainty. And so it guarantees that when the cat turns the crank, it's going to set the trap on the mouse. This is in contrast to inference, and this is the type of reasoning we see with machine learning and LLMs. This is the process of drawing a conclusion based on evidence and data. The conclusion is only ever probable and not guaranteed. Here, I always think of the early astronomers that were carefully tracking the motion of the planets and able to infer very powerful laws of motion from it. This leads to, in my work, really focusing on the probabilistic nature of the outputs of LLMs. In a really direct sense, the output from an LLM is this high-dimensional multinormal distribution. And wherever that probability spikes, that's the next word, the next token, the next character. And how this sort of influences how I sort of frame solutions to users is that we're not trying to have this artificial general intelligence that does everything. It's more like we're trying to recruit the world's best poker player that can really read the data and give us an excellent prediction about the next thing we should do. One of the things we can do if we're trying to lean into the strengths of LLMs and let's say predict a value from a model is try to frame it as coming from a continuous distribution. We always have to remember that these models are made up of very dense numerical arrays, and this allows for very smooth interpolation and extrapolation between subtle concepts and meanings. The natural analogy here is, of course, musical, where we have this sort of analog signal. That's not to say that sometimes a business use case can be made to use a categorical inference. The providers of these LLMs have provided various ways to use structured formats to sort of predetermine certain categories. I'm also usually asking for justification or some sort of confidence value. Another good practice is to use an other or unknown category so that any sort of uncertainty or ambiguity in the data set is sort of captured in a category. But yes, absolutely, there's lots of benefits to using categorical inferences in any sort of agentic process. Another thing in practice that I'm always doing that along with the answer to the query, I'm also asking for a justification or a rationale for it. And this really helps with root cause analysis and just making sure that the model is behaving as expected when you're in your prompt or how it's using your context. This really allows you to have a great deal of observability in your agentic pipeline when you're trying to elicit that complex agentic reasoning. There are practitioners out there doing amazing things with images and generative AI, but as someone that's more focused on data enrichment and decision making, I definitely advocate for leveraging the textural strengths of LLMs. This really allows you to tap into the powerful general knowledge that these LLMs contain. And I've also been really impressed by the nuanced analysis they can have of very messy data. This is an example of something that I use when I'm trying to evaluate the complex reasoning and also the degree of reason that we see with the model along with the prompt and the context. For example, let's say we have a construction project. The first order logic would be trying to infer from the data something like how many workers are on site. But then we want to add more complex reasoning on top of that. We'd ask, like, if every worker has 2 scoops of ice cream, how much ice cream is that? And then we would continue to add more complexity. If every worker on site has 2 scoops of ice cream and every ice cream scoop is half a cup, and there are 10 cups in a pint, how many pints do you need to order so that all workers on site get ice cream? And this is an example that I use quite often in my agentic pipelines. This is something that's debated by practitioners, but I'm a very big advocate for making a clean break with how things have sort of traditionally been done. I don't think you have to rigidly follow how a human would do it. You don't need to follow how a junior analyst or a junior project manager would do it. I think there's better quality when you really play to the strengths of LLMs and really understanding how that context is engineered to get quality results. Certainly in my projects, you'll find me extremely highly focused on the deliverable and really understanding where the value is and what quality is in the deliverable to really extract the maximum value possible from implementing an agentic pipeline. The analogy here, of course, is a chef in a kitchen who doesn't necessarily need to follow traditional techniques to put out an excellent high quality meal. This is an overview of the materials that I developed for this presentation. I really appreciate you watching. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn with any questions you have. Please like and share. It's very helpful. Thanks again.